At the beginning of the last video, I asked what the point was in doing a retrospective of the Metal Gear Solid series. It's arguably the most analyzed game series of all time, so what original thought could I offer? That question becomes even more valid in regards to Metal Gear Solid 2. I have done 4 analysis videos of MGS2 during my time on YouTube, covering pretty much every important detail about the game. Even though my plan is to go through each Metal Gear Solid game in order of release, I arguably could have skipped MGS2 and went right to 3. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was one last point I had to drive home in regards to MGS2. It's a point that I think needs to be constantly reasserted. One of the previous videos I did on Metal Gear Solid 2 was titled The Most Profound Moment in Gaming History. The profound moment in question deals with the final codec conversation between the main character, Raiden, and the villainous Patriot AI. One of the things that made this conversation so profound was the discussion of digital misinformation and how that would lead to an intellectually degraded populace. The profundity is elevated when you consider the fact that this conversation took place in a game that was released in 2001, more than a decade before the issue reached public consciousness. While I mostly got a positive response from the people who watched that video, there were a decent number of people who disagreed with my initial assertion that MGS2 had the most profound moment in gaming history. Some thought that another gaming moment should hold that title. Others thought that the issue of misinformation was not a quote-unquote new problem. While I certainly welcome disagreement, and these among other disagreements are perfectly reasonable, I think people are forgetting one important factor, the one that I said needs to be reasserted. That factor deals with your susceptibility to the problem of misinformation. And when I say your susceptibility, I mean you. In my retrospective of Metal Gear Solid 1, we analyzed the game's central one-word theme as given by series creator Hideo Kojima. That theme is gene. In the first game, the classic nature versus nurture question was posed. How much of a human being is determined by their genes, and how much are they nurtured by their environment? The game seemed to deduce that while a human being is certainly bound to their genetic heritage, they also had the power to transcend that and become their own person. In other words, a human being could be nurtured to overcome their nature. While this is a positive, empowering message, like with anything in life, there is a potential downside. Though a human being can evolve beyond the circumstances they were born into, what if they evolved from something bad into something worse? This is the central problem referenced by Metal Gear Solid 2's theme. The central one-word theme of Metal Gear Solid 2 is meme. When I say meme, I don't refer to humorous images that people share with each other online. A meme is a memory, idea, or behavior that spreads from person to person. Memes function much like genes. They replicate and they determine the characteristics of their hosts. Like genes, these memes are often passed on by our parents. It is the mixture of a parent's genes as well as their ideas and behaviors that a child latches onto in early life. It is this mixture of memes and genes that determines a human's personality in adulthood. Unlike genes, however, memes do not go through a process of natural selection. They do not evolve in accordance with natural law. This fact allows bad memes to foster just as much, if not more, than good memes do. Granted, human beings have done their best to inculcate virtue into their children at an early age, and keep them away from quote-unquote bad memes and other corrupting influences. In other words, they have tried to apply a process like natural selection when nurturing their children. Nurtural selection, if you will. While this developmental process has borne various levels of success, it meets a unique problem in the internet age. What memes will our children encounter when they go online? No amount of parental control will prevent our kids from the wealth of fake news, inflammatory discussion, and explicit imagery that exists on the internet. And unlike bad genes, which have the potential to die off, bad memes are preserved in all their triteness, never fading and always accessible. Every day we see the effect that junk data is having on our fellow man. Everywhere we look, we see people possessed by memes, married to false information that confirms their biases and salaciously attacking those who voice the most minute disagreement. This has all been fostered by the internet. The issue of digital misinformation is so malignant that nobody is immune. I am certain that even I believe in things that are wrong, and that my belief might actively be making things worse in regards to some aspect of human life. While breaking free from one's genetic heritage is difficult, breaking free from misinformation is damn near impossible at times. Hideo Kojima recognized this fact and tried to warn us about it 20 years ago. Though other pieces of media like Deus Ex discussed the problem of misinformation with similar profundity, there is one element that makes MGS2's take on the matter slightly better in my opinion. Instead of simply discussing the problem, MGS2 made the gamer an active participant in the spreading of misinformation. That is the point which I believe needs constant reassertion. The primary example of this lies with MGS2's introduction of the character Raiden. Though it is common knowledge now that Raiden is the lead protagonist of Metal Gear Solid 2, there was a time when the entire gaming world thought that Solid Snake would be the game's main character. Up until the game's release in 2001, all of the marketing for the game put Solid Snake front and center. The promise of being able to play as the hero of Shadow Moses in a more immersive, graphically detailed world was tantalizing. It was this promise that made MGS2, at the time, the most anticipated game ever. Kojima knew how strong the desire was to play as Snake again. The thought that MGS2's plot would belong to anybody else other than Snake was inconceivable. Yet it is with this circumstance that Kojima found a perfect opportunity. An opportunity to do what he does best: mess with his audience. The story of Metal Gear Solid 2 begins 2 years after Metal Gear Solid 1. In the 2 years that followed the Shadow Moses incident, the existence of Metal Gear Rex was revealed to the world. As a result, every industrialized nation on the globe started to create their own Metal Gear derivatives. Given that the original Metal Gears were created to launch nuclear missiles from any place on Earth, the rest of the world wanted the same capability. Given this fact, Solid Snake decided to team up with the chief engineer of Metal Gear Rex from the first game, Otacon. Both Otacon and Snake form a non-governmental organization called Philanthropy in response to the global mass production of Metal Gears. The simple goal of this NGO was to uncover the development of Metal Gears, find them, and prevent their completion, which usually took the form of destroying them. At the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 2, both Otacon and Snake receive classified intelligence regarding a new model of Metal Gear created by the United States Marine Corps. This Metal Gear was codenamed Ray. It was being transported down the Hudson River in New York on a tanker ship named the USS Discovery. Snake's mission was to infiltrate the tanker, take pictures of the new Metal Gear model, and then post those pictures on the internet. Unfortunately for Snake, he wasn't the only one who was interested in this new Metal Gear model. A group of Russian mercenaries invaded the tanker almost immediately after Snake's arrival. This group was led by two people, Colonel Sergei Gerlukovich and Revolver Ocelot, one of the antagonists from the first game. At first, the supposed goal of the mercenaries was to steal Ray for the sake of renewing Russia's military program. This was certainly Gerlukovich's idea. However, Ocelot had other plans. Once Snake and the mercenaries infiltrated the lower hull of the tanker, Ocelot staged a coup against his brothers in arms. Instead of stealing Ray for Russia, Ocelot's personal stated goal was to return Ray to the Patriots. We'll talk more about who the Patriots are later. After murdering both Gurlukovich, the Marine commander Scott Dolph, and the rest of the Russian troops, Ocelot hijacks Metal Gear Ray and sinks the tanker. The game initially leads us to believe that Snake drowned in the wreckage as the game fades to black. The game then jumps forward another 2 years. Due to the large amount of oil that had supposedly been leaked by the tanker, a large environmental cleaning facility had been placed around the whole mess. This facility is known as the Big Shell. Similar to the events of the tanker incident, the Big Shell was hijacked by terrorists. The leaders of this new terrorist incident were former members of a US government special forces unit known as Dead Cell. The members of this group are known as Fortune, Fat Man, Vamp, and Solidus Snake. These leaders hired what was left of Sergei Gurlukovich's private army to aid them in the hijacking. On the day of the hijacking, the US President, James Johnson, along with 30 other people were doing a routine inspection of the Big Shell. Once these hostages were taken and the Big Shell fell under the terrorists' control, they issued their demands. Unless they received $30 billion in cash, the terrorists would destroy the Big Shell and cause one of the greatest environmental disasters in history. Our mission was to disarm these terrorists by any means necessary, rescue the president, and free the hostages. Unfortunately for us, the gamers, this new mission did not involve us playing as Solid Snake. For the rest of the game, which constitutes roughly 80 to 85% of the game's totality, we are playing as a new character, Raiden. To many gamers, this was a devastating blow. Not only did the marketing seem to lie to us, never mentioning the existence of Raiden once, this new character seems to be the antithesis of everything Snake is. Aside from superficial differences, such as Raiden not being as masculine or brooding as Snake is, Raiden is clearly nowhere near as courageous. Oftentimes, we hear Raiden express a desire to abandon the mission and go home. For these reasons and many more, Raiden quickly became the object of scorn for millions of gamers. 20 years on, Metal Gear Solid 2 is considered by many to be the worst game in the franchise because of Raiden's inclusion. However, what many of these people don't seem to realize is that Kojima knew Raiden would not be accepted. He knew people would desperately cling to Solid Snake and rage about the fact that they did not receive what was advertised. Yet, Kojima included Raiden anyway, because doing so would illustrate a greater point. That greater point reflects the game's core theme of meme. As I pointed out at the beginning of this video, memes have the capacity to possess us. They can bend us to their will and control our every action. Sometimes, a person can be so completely possessed by a meme that if we were to speak to them, we wouldn't be sure if we were speaking to the person as an individual or to the meme. Let us use Metal Gear Solid 2's bait and switch as an example. If a gamer said that they didn't like the game because of Raiden, is it because they legitimately just didn't like the way the character was written? Or are they judging both him and the game based on their betrayed expectations? If it's the latter, one could make the argument that the gamer is possessed by the idea, the meme, of playing as Snake, and is unwilling, or rather incapable, of looking at Metal Gear Solid 2's story empirically. Some people might look at a person like this as pitiable, laughable. The problem is, we are just as guilty of this type of behavior in other facets of our own lives. Whether it's in regards to politics, philosophy, religion, science, most if not all human beings are possessed by memes. We see this most clearly when we present counter-arguments to our ideological opponents. How often have you presented a counter-argument to a conservative or liberal, a religious person or an atheist, and been met with the most vicious, smug derision. I'm certain almost all of us have. In these cases, the people have become so possessed by memes and the ideological bias they confer that they've lost all capacity to be their own person. Instead, they have become avatars of a meme. With all of this being said, it is completely understandable that people react so negatively when their worldviews are challenged. After all, memes provide our lives with structure. They help us explain, rightly or wrongly, the confusing world around us. They make us feel less vulnerable to the tribulations of life. When that structure is threatened, when the understanding of our own life teeters on the edge of chaos, we inevitably want to retaliate. We will be even more violent in our retaliation if the memes that are being threatened are ones we have embraced our whole lives. In these cases, people are more likely to kill those who threaten their ideology rather than admit that their whole life is a lie. What makes Metal Gear Solid 2's plot so brilliant is that it forces Raiden, and by extension the gamer, to face the consequences of embracing fiction instead of fact. This is especially difficult because almost every person, place, and thing in the game is presented in a false way. At the end of the game, every false layer has been pulled back, revealing a truth that is so terrifying that it almost has to be denied. The truth in question has to do with the gamer being an active participant in perpetuating false information. Before we get to that though, let us list some of the lesser falsities this game presents us and the truth that lies behind them. The Special Forces unit Dead Cell, which hijacked the Big Shell, was painted as purely evil terrorists whose sole intent was $30 billion in cash. This is not true. Dead Cell had a tragic history. They were falsely blamed for the mass murder of civilians by the Patriots, the secret organization we mentioned before. On top of this, previous members of Dead Cell were liquidated by the US military for suspicious and potentially immoral reasons. When they took over the Big Shell, they didn't do so for money. In fact, the demand for $30 billion was a complete lie. Rather, Big Shell was hijacked for the purposes of eliminating the Patriots, but we'll get into more of that later. Solid Snake dying during the tanker incident was another lie. He plays a large supporting role for the rest of the game. Initially though, he lies about his identity. When he first meets up with Raiden, he tells him that his name is Iroquois Pliskin, and that he was a part of the SEAL team sent in to take out Dead Cell. Though taking out Dead Cell was a tangential part of Snake's mission, it wasn't the primary objective. Just like with the tanker mission, Snake received intel about a new model of Metal Gear being worked on in the Big Shell, and he was there to destroy it. Raiden learns about this new model of Metal Gear once he meets up with the President around the middle part of the game. It is also at this point that Raiden not only learns about the true history of Dead Cell, but about who their primary enemy is, the aforementioned Patriots. For all intents and purposes, they are the Metal Gear universe's version of the Illuminati. They are a secret government group that controls the United States of America. What we call democracy, elections, a free market economy, even the American presidency itself, all of that is a show. Everything is controlled by this group, and has been for several decades. Unfortunately for the Patriots, however, one aspect of human life is threatening to fall outside of their realm of control. Due to the rise of the internet in the 21st century, the Patriots had begun to lose control over what information was shared. Information was being shared at such a large speed and with such magnitude that the Patriots were unable to regulate it. For obvious reasons, this greatly inconvenienced the Patriots' ability to rule. In response, the Patriots sought to create a massive data processing system capable of controlling information distribution. The name of this system was appropriately named GW, after George Washington. This system would be housed within a gigantic fortress guarded by several Metal Gear rays to ensure that nobody could interfere with the Patriots' information filtration. The name of this fortress is Arsenal Gear, and it was being built directly under our noses. Another lie that we were told was that the big shell was created to clean up the oil spill from the tanker. This is not true. It was camouflage for the development of Arsenal Gear. Dead Cell's original intention when hijacking the big shell was to steal Arsenal Gear from the Patriots and ensure GW would not be brought into full operation. Instead, Dead Cell wanted to use Arsenal Gear to launch a nuclear weapon over the skies of Manhattan, disabling all electronics below with an electromagnetic pulse. The purpose of this, according to Dead Cell's primary leader, Solidus Snake, was to remove Manhattan from the control of the Patriots and allow Dead Cell to turn the area into a true republic, founded upon original American ideals such as freedom, civil rights, and opportunities. Though Dead Cell's actions are certainly questionable, their motives are arguably noble. If the Patriots wish to control human thought and behavior via the internet, wouldn't many of us want to stop that kind of fascist tyranny? Wouldn't we want to have the freedom to think for ourselves and make our own choices? These thoughts leave us with a nagging question. If Dead Cell is trying to stop the Patriots' tyranny, then what are Raiden and Snake doing to try and stop Dead Cell? Wouldn't they want to join Dead Cell in their efforts? President Johnson explains why this might not be the best decision.
Can you imagine what would happen if they ceased to function? Picture a massive political vacuum. A space that every powermonger will try to fill for their own greedy ends. I'm talking about an unregulated power struggle, panic, civil war, chaos. Like it or not, the Patriots is an organization that must continue to exist.
Like I said at the beginning of this video, there is a negative side to every decision. Though I personally would prefer to live in a world where my thoughts and actions weren't governed by some invisible organization, there are costs that must be taken into consideration. Ultimately, both Snake and Raiden attempted to not only stop Dead Cell, but also destroy GW via a worm cluster. At first, they succeeded in uploading the virus to GW, but they end up being captured by the remaining members of Dead Cell. Right before Dead Cell launches the nuclear weapon over Manhattan, Revolver Ocelot steps in. Throughout the Big Shell incident, we are led to believe that Ocelot is aiding Dead Cell in their efforts against the Patriots. What most of us seem to have forgotten, however, is what Ocelot did at the end of the tanker mission. He said he wanted to return Metal Gear Ray to the Patriots, suggesting that he was working for them. Right before the nuclear weapon is launched, Ocelot reveals himself as a double agent for the Patriots. Now, as for why Ocelot allowed so many things to happen that would seem disadvantageous to the Patriots, like allowing Dead Cell to hijack Arsenal Gear in the first place, or allowing the upload of the virus to GW, Ocelot reveals the horrifying truth. Everything that has happened in the game up until this point, from the tanker incident all the way up to the uploading of the virus, was scripted by the Patriots. It was intentional. But why? Throughout the game, there are several events that directly parallel the events of Shadow Moses. Both games feature a ninja, both games feature a collection of villains with special talents, both games feature the protagonist swimming to an isolated base that houses a Metal Gear, both games have the player using a remote-controlled missile to destroy a circuit panel, both games have Colonel Campbell commanding your every move. The similarities between both games go on and on. Certainly, these similarities were not lost on most people who played both games. Nonetheless, we played on, passing these things off as a coincidence or as lazy game design. Like Raiden, we were more concerned with being like Snake again. Even if we can't play as Snake, the fact that the events of Metal Gear Solid 2 parallel the events of Metal Gear Solid 1 were a satisfactory substitute. What we didn't realize was that the desire to be like Snake, be it Raiden's desire or our desire, would be our downfall. Ocelot explains that it was no coincidence that the Big Shell incident mimicked the Shadow Moses incident from the first game. This was all part of an elaborate program called the S3 Plan. The Patriots told Ocelot that the S3 Plan stood for Solid Snake Simulation. By putting a soldier through events similar to the ones Solid Snake went through in Shadow Moses, they could be shaped into a soldier whose skills were on par with Snake's. Despite the various signs given to Raiden and the gamer that something like this was going on, and that we were likely facilitating the problem by continuing with the game, we nonetheless pushed forward. After all, the fiction is better than the reality. Upon making this revelation, Ocelot once again escapes with Metal Gear Ray and sends the now defunct Arsenal Gear crashing into Manhattan. Upon arriving there, the Patriots contact Raiden and they engage in what I have referred to, and other people have referred to on multiple occasions, as the most profound moment in gaming history. The Patriots reveal that they are not human, but an artificial intelligence. They explain to Raiden that while his mission was set up to mimic the events of Shadow Moses, it wasn't actually done in order to produce soldiers on par with Solid Snake. Ocelot was not told the whole truth in this regard. In fact, he was lied to when he was told that S3 stands for Solid Snake Simulation. Instead, it stands for Selection for Societal Sanity. The purpose of Raiden's mission was to determine how willing a human being was to follow orders, even when those orders seemed to originate from questionable sources. In this case, the orders that Raiden thought he was receiving from Colonel Campbell were, in fact, from the Patriot AI disguised as Colonel Campbell. There are many times in the mission where this reality is inferred. Whenever Raiden attempts to do something that would go against his mission's protocol, the AI outright says that he can't do that because it would go against the parameters of the simulation. It actually uses the word simulation. Towards the end of the game, when the virus was uploaded to GW, the AI starts to be inconsistent with its speech, either speaking electronically or saying things that have nothing to do with the task at hand. The AI even tells Raiden to turn the game console off at one point. The Patriots are literally begging Raiden to let their plan fail. Yet, we all played along with the fiction. We played along with it because of our desire to be like Snake again. It was that desire which the Patriots used as the basis for the S3 plan. This is what allowed the Patriots to enslave the world. Once GW was reconstructed, the Patriots would take the data they gathered from Raiden's mission and use it to perfect their information control system. Worst of all, throughout this conversation, the Patriot AI demeans Raiden, and by extension the gamer, for being so easily manipulated.
So you see, you're a perfect representative of the masses we need to protect. This is why we chose you. You accepted the fiction we've provided, obeyed our orders, and did everything you were told to. The exercise is a resounding success.
What Metal Gear Solid 2 proved is the human willingness to go along with fiction, even when the truth seems so evident. The gaming community was so desperate to play as Snake again that they played directly into Kojima's hand. Though the gamer didn't actually enslave the world, Kojima demonstrated how easily an unquestioning human being could do something that actively made the world worse. If we played along with the fiction of the game, who is to say that we aren't actively playing along with fiction in other aspects of our lives? In the age of digitized information, the possibility that we believe in misinformation, in fake news, in bad memes, is staggeringly high for all sides of the political spectrum. If most of us took a few minutes to think about this, we would realize it to be true. But nonetheless, it is much easier to chastise our ideological opponents for living in a fantasy land than to accept the possibility that our worldview is also based on lies.